You've got 30 days to relocate your livestock situation or we'll have you forcibly removed. That's what she led with. No hello, no handshake. Just an ultimatum sharp enough to nick bone, delivered from the lip of my grandfather's porch, on land that's carried our name since 1952. The air smelled like honest cattle and fresh-cut hay, and Karen Whitfield smelled like she tried to drown both under a Bath and Body Works oil spill. Industrial-strength vanilla blooming like a toxic cloud in the Texas wind as she clutched a clipboard the way some folks hold a Bible, convinced that paper becomes law if you squeeze it tight enough. I kept my coffee steady and my voice level. "Ma'am, this is private property," and she laughed a sound that could curdle milk, told me it wouldn't be private for long, and declared the street, the fence line, and by implication, the sky to be within her jurisdiction. 6 months in Cedar Falls and she already swung that HOA presidency like a badge. To back up a heartbeat, my name's Garrett Stone. Until recently, I was a senior policy advisor at HUD in Washington, D.C., where for 15 years I helped write the very regulations that govern homeowner associations across America, the kind of federal scaffolding that real leaders use and petty tyrants misunderstand. And then my grandfather Joe died and left me the Lazy G Ranch. 40 acres of oak-shadowed pasture and mineral rights oil companies have circled for decades like vultures waiting for a stumble, and I traded fluorescent lights for a sunrise that turns everything gold, traded hearings for meadowlarks, traded beltway traffic for boots crunching the same gravel path my grandfather walked for 70 years, the air carrying that cocktail of sage and mesquite and a peace you can't buy. The migraine sprouted next door in the form of Whispering Oaks Estates, $850, 000 McMansions where authentic rural charm means no manure within smelling distance, and within a week of closing Karen ran for the board. Within a month she was president. Within 2 months she was wielding that clipboard as if it could summon the wrath of God, bleaching the prairie down to a palette of bylaws and community standards. And 3 months after I moved in I found a violation notice taped to my door, alleging agricultural nuisances threatening property values. Translated, the smell of cattle offended new noses more delicate than reality. At first I laughed because it had to be a mix-up, a city transplant who thought ranches came staged like model homes. So I figured we'd sort it out over sweet tea and neighborly sense. That was my first mistake. The next week Karen arrived with her cousin Dale from County Code Enforcement, both armed with cameras and a vocabulary heavy on compliance, photographing everything from my manure pile to Grandpa's '74 tractor to chickens who looked personally insulted by the attention. She kept saying she was researching options, and that's when it clicked. This wasn't confusion, it was war. And the 40 acres with oil rights had a target painted on it. 2 days later a thick manila envelope appeared on my door. Whitfield and Associates Legal Services, screaming from the letterhead that my operation must cease immediately due to health hazards, environmental risks, and aesthetic violations. The survey map inside had been so obviously doctored it might as well have had clip art seams showing, with my boundary lines magically creeping into HOA common space, and the piece de resistance demanded my presence at an emergency compliance hearing at the Whispering Oaks Country Club, scheduled for a Thursday at 7, exactly when decent ranchers eat dinner and sane people mind their own business. I went anyway because sometimes you have to take the measure of the crazy in person. The conference room smelled like old money and industrial air freshener pretending the latter could erase the former. 12 board members sat behind a long, glossy mahogany table like a firing squad in business casual, and a single metal folding chair waited across from them as if humiliation were part of the decor. Karen presided in a navy blazer that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill, clicking through a PowerPoint entitled Agricultural Operations: Impact on Community Standards. With my manure pile rebranded Biological Hazard Zone, my chickens tagged Disease Vectors, and Grandpa's barn labeled Structural Eyesore, all delivered with the smile of a flight attendant announcing a water landing. "Mr. Stone," she said, voice bouncing off the wood-paneled walls, "you've been called here to address serious violations of our community covenants." I settled into the metal chair and asked to see those covenants, at which point the room's temperature fell through the floor. Karen shuffled papers, explained that legal review prevented distribution to outside parties, and I let the pause bloom before sliding my HUD credentials across the polished wood like a poker chip. 15 years drafting housing regs, ma'am, happy to help you navigate the legal complexities you're worried about. You could have heard a mouse sneeze. Half the board discovered their shoes. The other half discovered I was not, in fact, the rube in her script. Here's a thing most folks don't know. If an HOA claims jurisdiction over your parcel, they must provide governing documents upon request. Refusing can be used as evidence of discriminatory practices under the Fair Housing Act, and I watched that knowledge land like a brick in a glasshouse. A nervous woman raised her hand. Beverly Chen, the kind of third-grade teacher whose kindness is baked into the lines on her face, and asked, "Karen, didn't you say Mr. Stone was just some local rancher?" Karen's laugh took a swipe at the windows, but the board had seen the card. The meeting adjourned with promises to provide appropriate documentation after consultation, which in HOA dialect means, after we figure out what hole we dug, and outside in the parking lot the night sounds felt more honest than anything we'd heard inside. Crickets, an owl, the kind of Texas quiet that isn't silence so much as permission to think, and Beverly approached like she was planning a jailbreak. "Mr. Stone," she whispered, eyes darting like she expected Karen to leap from a hedge. "She's been lying about everything. Authority, money. There's something wrong here." She didn't have the receipts yet, but the tremor in her voice was the kind that comes from realizing you've been used, and it planted the seed that I wasn't just up against a power trip. I was up against a scheme. Back on the porch the next morning, Karen raised the stakes with a 30-day ultimatum and a whiff of developer desperation, and I looked past her shoulder at land my grandfather bought fresh out of Korea. Land that had weathered droughts and floods and tax seasons and now had to weather a woman who moved here 6 months ago and thought a clipboard could evict legacy. She jabbed a manicured finger at my fence and ranted about public easements, and I told her the county map said otherwise and that, if she wanted to see it, she could make an appointment and try a civil tone. She called me a squatter on my own land. Dale shifted like a man wishing for invisibility. The thing about leaving Washington for a ranch is you don't forget the rulebook. You just swap dress shoes for boots, and the rulebook travels. I'd lived my entire career on receipts and sunlight, and now I had both. Stamp surveys, recorded deeds, emails with county staff, and inside my head, the muscle memory of hearings where bluster always dies on cross-examination. Whispering Oaks had been sold an idea, country living sanitized of agriculture, and Karen had sold herself the lead role, bleached blonde hair helmeted against reason, athleisure priced like mortgages, smile sharpened to, "I need to speak to your manager" from 3 counties away. The ultimatum was the opening bell, but the fight had started earlier the moment she taped that first notice to my door. I closed the conversation the way you shut a gate on a windy day. Firm, no theatrics, and watched her vanish toward the subdivision that sprouted like a headache, and that night, under a sky that has more stars than Washington has lobbyists, I laid out my plan. Keep calm, keep cameras rolling, keep a ledger of every lie, and find out just how deep this scam goes. The turning point wasn't the credentials I slid across a table. It was the ally who found me in a parking lot, a teacher with the courage to say something is wrong, a voice from inside the machine telling me this wasn't going to be a neighborly misunderstanding. It was going to be an education. And if Karen wanted a lesson in how federal rules work from the wrong side, well, I'd been writing the answers for 15 years. Monday arrived like a bureaucrat with a stopwatch, right on time and determined to make an impression, and the first truck up my drive was county code enforcement, Dale Whitfield at the wheel and a clipboard thick enough to stop at point 30-06 held to his chest like a shield. He read from a list someone else had written, every barn, shed, and fence post suddenly requiring documentation that, in our case, had either burned in the barn fire 20 years back or was trapped in the fog of 1950s record keeping, and I watched him photograph my granddad's 1974 tractor as if the old Massey were a weapon of mass depreciation while I kept my voice even and my notes meticulous. Because if there's one thing 15 years in federal policy teaches you, it's that paper chases aren't about truth, they're about tempo. Tuesday delivered the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, a polite inspector with neat boots and a steel tape who spent 4 hours taking soil and water samples, eyes narrowing not at my operation but at whoever thought groundwater contamination could be conjured from clean pasture and a rotation plan that would make a textbook blush. He left sunburned and mildly annoyed, promising results in a week though, he added, with the weary candor of a man who's measured plenty of nonsense. Doesn't look like a problem, Mr. Stone. Wednesday brought the state agriculture department, a veterinarian named Dr. Martinez with a no-nonsense braid and the gait of someone who has stepped around more manure than most folks have stepped around lies, who ran her hands along glossy hides, checked eyes and ears and hooves, and then looked at me like she'd been sent to confirm whether the sky was blue. These animals are in better shape than half the HOA board back in town, she deadpanned, scribbling on a carbon form, and when she drove off I stood in a driveway that smelled less like hay and more like diesel after 3 consecutive days of official vehicles, and I saw it with the clarity of a courtroom air vent. It wasn't proof they wanted. It was pressure, death by paper cuts until I bled time and money and patience. The plan was obvious once you said it out loud. Make compliance more expensive than surrender, drown the target in appointments, fees, inspections, and rumors until the generous offer from a developer reads like a lifeboat. The thing about pressure, though, is it leaves fingerprints, and that's when Beverly Chen came rattling into my driveway in a Honda with a coffee cup clattering against her wedding ring, hands shaking with the complicated guilt of a good person who just realized she'd been drafted into a con. She sat on my steps with my old dog Charlie resting his chin on her shoe and slid me a manila folder so heavy it could have dented the porch. Texts, emails, bank snapshots, HOA agendas that looked official until you read the grammar. All of it painting a picture ugly enough to make a prosecutor hum. Sunset Holdings had been feeding Karen inside information for months. Parcel notes, timing, appraisals, and Karen had been promised a finder's fee and first pick of premium lots if she could push me out. The agricultural nuisance narrative was simply theater masking a land grab, and to make it sing she'd even printed a doctored survey. Lines shifted like a drunk's memory to show my fence-nibbling HOA common area, which I disproved in 10 minutes by overlaying the county GIS shapefile on the recorded meets and bounds and watching her fiction wobble like a cheap toupee in a strong wind. It gets worse, Beverly whispered, pulling another folder, the HOA's formation documents, which my HUD brain recognized as cosplay at 50 paces. No articles of incorporation on file with the state, no covenants recorded with the county, no bylaws published anywhere a court would recognize. They'd been operating with the legal authority of my chickens, and at least the chickens provided eggs. I felt the pivot click in my chest, the moment a dispute stops being a neighbor spat and becomes a case, and I opened my laptop to start the only clock that matters. A timeline. Thursday afternoon, Dr. Martinez called back with a voice that had picked up grit. I did some checking, she said, naming counties like a roll call. Tarrant, Collin, Williamson, each with a complaint file trail, where concerned residents had alleged diseased livestock adjacent to planned developments and each dismissed as unfounded. The pattern wasn't just local. It was a business model. I started building what in DC we used to call a federal-grade dossier, a master spreadsheet with every event, date, agency, and document. Scanned exhibits with Bates numbers in the footer. Hash values for the videos off my security cameras to preserve chain of custody. Screenshots of Karen's kitchen table letterhead Whitfield and Associates Legal Services with its telltale Costco printer margins. Side-by-side maps showing her photoshopped survey against the county recorder's plat. Transcriptions of Beverly's messages. A tab for conflicts/payments that tracked finder's fee promises to the calendar of Karen's most righteous emails. I filed open records requests under the Texas Public Information Act for every complaint lodged against my parcel in the last 6 months, knowing the timestamps would tell a story Karen had never intended anyone to read. I printed out the county's permit approvals for my fencing and gate, the fire code clearance for my pull-off lane, the email thread with dispatch confirming responders had my code, receipts pinned like butterflies under glass. I even snapped photos of the back of Karen's cease and desist, where the toner had streaked in a way unique to cheap printers because detail is how liars lose. When my coffee cooled, I mapped jurisdiction like I taught it. HUD for fair housing violations when community standards become a cudgel against lawful agricultural uses. Texas Real Estate Commission for undisclosed conflicts and fraud. FBI for the interstate pattern of wire and mail fraud wrapped in a ribbon of under color of law. The State Attorney General for coordinated consumer fraud. The IRS for unreported income masked as finder's fees. And yes, the RICO box got a yellow star in the margin because patterns matter when you can prove an enterprise. Beverly asked, small-voiced and steady, "What if we're too late?" And I told her the thing I've told 100 scared families in smaller rooms in grimmer buildings. Patterns make cases and cases make justice, and the fastest way to help everyone is to keep our hands clean and our files immaculate. She nodded, the way teachers nod when they decide a lesson is worth the semester, and promised to keep digging inside the board. Her access a key I would never abuse and she would never use without documenting to the last penny. That night, with coyote voices weaving the pasture into a single dark cloth, I paged through the fake HOA hearing minutes that named me a danger to community continuity, a phrase so hollow it echoed, and I thought about all the families who would have folded at the second inspection. the ranches that would have sold because the diesel smell of government trucks started to feel like inevitability, and I felt something like anger but truer. Stewardship, the kind that says I'm not just keeping a fence upright, I'm keeping the rules honest. The death by paper cut strategy had misjudged me by a decade and a career. Every clipboard swing, every doctored map, every complaint filed without a real predicate was another stitch in a pattern I could hand to a federal team and say, follow this thread. When the TCEQ results arrived the next week, clean water, clean soil, a polite no further action at this time, I slotted them behind Dr. Martinez's report and under the inspection logs Dale had signed, and the binder began to look like what it was. Not a defense, but an indictment written in the language bureaucrats speak fluently. Dates, stamps, signatures, and the absence of them where they ought to be. By the time the sun burned down that evening, turning the pasture the color of a law library's lamp glow, I'd set 3 alarms in my head. When to warn agencies without spooking the quarry, when to push the HOA board toward its own reckoning without letting it torch its books, and when to take this out of the kitchen and into a courtroom where truth has better acoustics. Karen had wanted to hassle a rancher into a quick sale. What she'd found instead was a man who'd built mazes like the one she was running in, and who knew every exit. Friday morning arrived in full costume, a satellite truck squatting across my cattle gate like it had paid taxes on the easement, a reporter with perfect hair talking about a controversial ranch operation threatening children's health, and Karen center stage directing masked kids into the background as if bovine exhalations were biohazards. I walked out with coffee strong enough to wake a stone statue and watched her wave toward my pastures like she was unveiling a toxic plume instead of alfalfa and manure, then stood back while Channel 7 did something I hadn't expected. Basic journalism. While Karen spun her script for the A-cam, the B-cam peeled off and started grabbing interviews with actual neighbors. Old Pete Jameson, who's known my family since the Korean War, saying loud enough to register on a seismograph that the stone place has been here 70 years and that woman's been trying to run him off since the moving truck still had Dallas plates, and Rosa from the feed store pointing out that I paid bills on time, kept healthy cattle, and if there'd been an environmental problem they'd have been the first to know. You could feel the narrative wobble like a ladder on gravel. By noon, the reporter had discovered 2 details Karen somehow forgot to mention on camera. Her real estate pipeline to Sunset Holdings and the fact she'd been in Cedar Falls less than a year. The teaser that aired that evening was no longer ranch contamination. It was HOA president with developer ties manipulating a nuisance campaign, complete with B-roll of my normal, boring operation and a quick nod to the inspector reports. Soil clean, water clean, cattle glossy. A good media backfire creates vacuum, and into that space I placed the one thing bullies hate most: structured process. Years in HUD taught me which doors to knock and how to show up with receipts, so I spent the weekend turning my binder into 3 separate, prosecutable packages. HUD for the fair housing angle where community standards get wielded as a cudgel against lawful agricultural use. The Texas Real Estate Commission for undisclosed conflicts and deceptive practices, and the FBI's white-collar unit for wire fraud, mail fraud, and civil rights violations under color of law when fake authority and doctored documents are used to coerce property owners. Each packet had a cover memo that would make an auditor purr: timeline, exhibits, statutory hooks, digital hashes for video files, and side-by-side maps that showed how Karen's survey had been photoshopped into fiction. I didn't send a rant, I sent a roadmap, and by Monday I had intake numbers and a familiar cadence on the other end of the phone. The clipped, non-committal tone of federal agents who say very little while doing a lot. Meanwhile, Beverly, bless the stubborn brilliance of retired teachers, was quietly running a mutiny with surgical precision. She'd already twigged to the missing articles of incorporation and unrecorded covenants. Now she began walking board members through the money they thought they were approving. Pool maintenance funds mysteriously reallocated to legal fees, landscaping budgets that bled into investigations, and a community outreach line item large enough to purchase a small spacecraft. Tuesday night's emergency board session, recorded, perfectly legal in Texas, sounded like a confession in 12 acts. Demands for the incorporation certificate, for the recorded covenants, for an explanation of a $127,000 hole in the accounts. Karen's responses ping-ponged from denial, never seen those numbers, to deflection, Beverly must have misbooked, to sanctimony. Leadership is hard, trust the process. Until Jim Patterson, a retired electrician with a meter for nonsense, asked the only question that mattered. Show us the actual state filings. The silence at that moment was thick enough to pave a driveway. By Wednesday morning, 3 board members had resigned rather than ride the exploding clown car any farther. And 2 more were privately asking Beverly how to remove a president who might take the whole neighborhood down with her. That's when Karen tried the oldest misdirection in the bag: a false police report. Sheriff Bob Morrison, who's known my family's coffee habits longer than Karen's lived in the county, showed up late afternoon with the look of a man determined to check a box properly. She claimed I'd threatened her on the phone. I handed over my call logs and a copy of Beverly's recording of Karen outlining final solutions for the ranch problem, then invited him into the office to watch the security footage of a midnight cameo where a familiar silhouette spray-painted "toxic" on my fence while instructing a friend to make it look good for the cameras. The sheriff listened to maybe 30 seconds before rubbing a hand over his jaw and sighing the sigh of a man who's just added 3 charges to a list he'd hoped would stop growing. Filing a false report, criminal mischief, conspiracy to defraud. "Son," he said, pocketing a thumb drive, "if this were a rodeo, she'd have found every way to fall off the same horse." He wanted to move then and there, but I asked him for a little patience. The federal wheels were already turning and an early arrest might spook bigger fish. That calculus changed the rhythm, not the resolve. The thing about enterprise-level schemes is they attract contractors, and one of Karen's, Rick, a PI with a mustache that belonged in a VHS detective flick, arrived Friday evening wearing guilt like a borrowed suit. He'd been hired to find something on my ranch. Anything illegal that could justify a warrant, a search, a headline. He'd refused and recorded the meeting. I sat him at the kitchen table beneath my grandfather's old lamp while he pushed his phone across the wood and let me hear Karen offer $10,000 to plant evidence and get something that will stick. In 15 years of enforcement work, I'd learned to distrust anything too perfect. This was perfect the way fingerprints on a chocolate cake are perfect. Messy, undeniable, and appetites killing. Rick wanted immunity, I wanted his file. We both wanted the same outcome, so I called my contact at the bureau and asked how to thread a needle without shredding fabric. The answer was familiar. Keep collecting, don't tip the target, preserve the chain, and be ready. News travels in a small town the way heat travels on a tin roof, and by the weekend you could feel the temperature in Whispering Oaks drop 20 degrees. Folks who'd once signed petitions with the enthusiasm of a pep rally were now opening their email and seeing resignation letters, audit questions, and an inconvenient truth. Their HOA might never have been a real organization at all. Old Pete brought by a pie and a story about his dad pulling wire for my granddad in '63. Rosa slipped me a list of customers Sunset Holdings had approached with special opportunities that seemed to align suspiciously with Karen's complaint calendar. Beverly kept feeding the ledger with emails and bank printouts she collected like a careful librarian preserving a scandal. Through it all, I stayed on the porch as much as I could, not because I was playing the stoic cowboy, but because a calm man on his porch is the visual antidote to a chaos narrative. The camera crews had moved on, the inspectors had put down their clipboards, and what remained was the sound of cattle pulling at grass and the wind pushing mesquite, both of which make better testimony than any speech I could give. By Sunday night, the binder had a new spine label, Media Plus Fed Action, and the tabs inside told a clean story. Public smear, local truth, federal triggers, board implosion, false report, vandalism, bribery attempt. Karen had wanted to turn my week into a collage of crises. She'd accidentally stitched together a pattern prosecutors love. I went to bed with the sense that the next escalation wouldn't be subtle, cornered performers rarely are, and wrote 3 lines on a yellow pad before the lamp clicked off: be ready to quiz jurisdiction. Cameras rolling multiple angles. Don't interrupt the rope. Let her keep pulling. Monday's escalation arrived dressed like authority and smelled like fresh toner. A rented sedan rolled up my drive and 2 federal agents in government-issue windbreakers stepped out with faces that said central casting and a closure order that would have fooled anyone who hadn't spent 15 years writing and reading the real thing. The lead man read from a script about an immediate public health emergency, requiring evacuation of all livestock within 24 hours, waved a document, with seals thick as pancakes, and stood a little too far back from the manure to be believable. So I let my cameras drink it in from 3 angles and asked the questions that snap counterfeits in half. Under which statute does EPA close privately owned agricultural operations? Which CFR section authorizes this order? Which office issued the case number? And watched his eyes go wide as his partner's wrist began to tremble, then followed up with the kind of calm that invites panic. Let me ring. Assistant Secretary Johnson at HUD to coordinate interagency response, and before I could tap a contact, the pair were retreating to their rental on reverse autopilot, muttering something about paperwork errors while my actual federal contacts watched from concealed positions down by the windbreak, documenting this community theater for what it was: felony impersonation wearing mail-order windbreakers. Karen, of course, turned the fiasco into victory on social media within the hour, posting triumphant clips of the fake agents handing me their forged order, claiming she'd successfully coordinated federal intervention to protect children's health, and Beverly texted me audio from an emergency HOA huddle where Karen, riding the high of her own fantasy, bragged about high-level contacts in Washington and secret meetings with senators, every boast another rope burn on the noose she'd knotted. Around her narrative, the recordings were ugly and invaluable, proof she'd crossed the line between manipulation and delusion. Late that afternoon, Karen arrived with Dale and 2 other men to assist with voluntary livestock evacuation as ordered by federal authorities, and my security system caught the whole thing in HD, Karen at the cattle gate, instructing her crew to swing it wide to help the process along, her voice a tight hiss as she told them to move the herd toward the road. Livestock theft dressed up as compliance, right up until Sheriff Bob Morrison's cruisers rolled in on a tip and the accomplices scattered like roaches from a kitchen light, leaving Karen standing there in designer boots with her hand on my gate and the look of someone who finally understood the difference between playing cop and meeting one. Bob stepped out with that tired kindness he saves for fools, recited a list of charges that got longer as he talked: criminal conspiracy, impersonating law enforcement under color of law, attempted livestock theft, filing false reports, vandalism, and cuffed her while she shouted about federal authority and conspiracies so loudly the mesquites stopped rustling to listen, then eased her into the back seat as she promised the sky would fall on anyone who didn't applaud. I asked Bob to hold the line on further moves for 48 hours. My federal folks were teeing up bigger pins and premature celebration never helps, and then sat on the porch that evening with coffee that tasted like resolved questions, listening to cattle tear at grass and coyotes tune the dusk, knowing the next scene would be public and decisive because Karen doesn't do quiet endings. She called her own coronation for Tuesday night at the community center, a town hall to celebrate federal resolution of the agricultural crisis, and the room filled with folding chairs, industrial coffee, local media, and a few unfamiliar faces whose posture said they carried more than notepads. Karen strode in wearing a navy suit and the certainty of a person who believes press clippings even when she wrote them, opened a PowerPoint titled Federal Intervention. Success with a photo of my pastures under a red X, and launched into a speech about persistent advocacy and her special coordination with Washington, her voice bouncing off cinder block like a sermon in a gymnasium. Beverly, God bless a teacher's timing, stood up mid-aisle and asked why Karen had been arrested the day before, then followed it with the $127,000 question, where the community funds had gone, and the crowd's temperature dropped 20 degrees as Karen tried to fold those answers into operational expenses and legal coordination. I stood at the back until she reached the slide about official orders, then walked forward while the sea of chairs parted, took the mic, and clicked the next image. Beverly had quietly swapped in a real deck, bank statements showing embezzlement, text threads linking Karen to Sunset Holdings and promised finders fees, side-by-side maps exposing the doctored survey, clips of Karen spray painting toxic on my fence in the night, and stills of the fake agents at my gate with analysis arrows pointing to tells a first-year paralegal would spot. You could feel the room tilt as neighbors turned toward one another with expressions that mixed anger with a grief people feel when they realize trust has teeth marks. Karen, I said, not raising my voice because the facts were loud enough, you've been running the same play across counties. Fake violations, bureaucratic harassment, manufactured crises, then a lowball offer from your developer friends, and it stops here. And before the echo faded, a woman near the aisle stood and flipped a badge that made cameras blink. Special Agent Martinez, FBI, announcing the arrest, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, civil rights deprivations under color of law, RICO. Predicates pending, and reading rights while Karen protested with a ferocity that only made the cuffs look more reasonable. Flash bulbs popped, local reporters found a better headline, and Agent Martinez paused at the door to turn back and say the sentence that washed the last of the stink out of the room. For the record, Mr. Stone's ranch is in full compliance with federal, state, and local regulations. Ms. Whitfield has been under investigation for systematic housing fraud affecting multiple counties. And the silence that followed was broken by old Pete's voice from row 3. We owe that man an apology, which was more absolution than I'd hoped for and exactly the one that mattered. People didn't just leave angry, they left organized. Beverly collecting names for a legitimate association, Jim Patterson sketching an audit plan on the back of a flyer, Maria Santos outlining next steps for dissolution of the fraudulent HOA and referrals to the Attorney General, and 3 residents at the door comparing notes about relatives in other counties who'd lost land to mysterious nuisance campaigns that suddenly weren't mysterious at all. I walked into the parking lot under a sky the color of rinsed denim and shook hands with neighbors who'd avoided my gate a month ago, then went home to file my own notes because endings that hold are always written down. The next morning the phone started a different song, state investigators slotting into the federal cadence, the Real Estate Commission opening a formal case on undisclosed conflicts, the county clerk confirming receipt of petitions to vacate every violation Karen had ever taped to a door, and by afternoon Sheriff Morrison stopped by for coffee and a copy of the town hall deck for the scrapbook, he said with a tired grin. The wind felt cleaner, like a front had finally blown through. It would be weeks before indictments and months before pleas, but the fulcrum had shifted in 36 hours because we'd done the 2 things bullies never planned for. We stayed patient and we stayed on paper. Karen had bet that noise beats records. She forgot who writes the records, and standing on the porch that evening watching the last light comb the pasture, I understood why this part had to be public. So the community could see the difference between governance and grift, and so the next family who gets a clipboard ultimatum will know exactly which door to knock on and which file to ask for. 6 months later, the porch has settled back into the rhythm my grandfather always promised me it would keep if I tended it right. Coffee hot and uncomplicated, sun lifting over 40 acres like it's clocked in for another honest day, cattle tearing at Bermuda with the contented sound only healthy animals make, and from that quiet I can see the entire arc we've traveled. Karen Whitfield is not a gust of nuisance anymore. She's an inmate number, 15 to 20 years under a plea that reads like a lesson plan in what not to do with a clipboard. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, civil rights deprivations under color of law, impersonation of federal officers, and the RICO predicates that stitched her one-woman storm into an enterprise. The forfeiture process shook loose more than $2 million in stolen funds and ill-gotten assets, which the U.S. Attorney's folks distributed to victims across 3 counties, including old ranchers and new homeowners alike who'd been bled by illegal fees that turned out to be the price of their own harassment, and the developer that bankrolled her, Sunset Holdings, watched $200 million in public contracts evaporate like a mirage on hot asphalt before filing Chapter 11 and answering their own indictments. Turns out government buyers don't smile on companies whose growth strategy looks like organized theft with HOA letterhead. Whispering Oaks, stripped of its counterfeit crown, voted itself into something sane and honest. Cedar Falls Neighbors, incorporated for real this time, covenants recorded where a judge can see them, books transparent enough to make an auditor clap, and they elected Beverly Chen as their first legitimate president. She runs meetings like a seasoned teacher, agenda short, questions welcome, no theatrics. And the charter they adopted does the one thing Karen's never could. It minds the community. Without trying to own people's lives, focusing on what counties don't cover and folks don't want to do alone. Ditch clearing, common area mowing, firewise brush cuts along the greenbelt, a little fund for the retention pond. No paint chips, no drone patrols, no emergency hearings at a country club. Property values, if anyone still cares after what we lived through, ticked upward, not because fear sells, but because buyers prefer neighborhoods that run on sunlight instead of secrecy. The ranch itself is better than it's been in decades. We tightened a few cross fences, tuned the rotation, drilled a new well into a sweet vein I swear Joe Stone could smell from heaven, and the land responded with a kind of generosity you only get when you stop fighting it. Grass thick and honest, calves slick, the mineral rights still under our boots for whoever comes begging. And on Saturdays, I open the gate for city families who want their kids to meet milk before it's a carton and to count. The beats of a bovine heartbeat with a stethoscope under Dr. Martinez's guidance. She's become a regular, bringing vet students to walk the line between science and stewardship, using our pastures as a lab for sustainable ranching that coexists with subdivisions without bowing to them, and she likes to tell her students the same thing I tell every homeowner who asks for help. Good management leaves fewer excuses for bad actors. Sheriff Bob drops by whenever his route takes him this way, boots scuffed, hat tipped, that same half-grin he wore the night the cuffs finally clicked. He still shakes his head over the case like a man trying to square the circle of human nature. Never seen somebody work so hard to provide the government its own evidence, he says, accepting coffee and a copy of whatever workshop flyer we're cooking up next. And when he pulls out of the drive, he doesn't linger at the gate because gates are ordinary again, not battlegrounds. Out of the settlement from the civil suit we filed after the dust settled, I stood up the Garrett Stone Community Defense Foundation. Nothing fancy. A 501(c)(3), a clean ledger, a small staff of mean-as-cats litigators with ranch dirt on their boots and spreadsheets in their veins, and we've already represented more than 30 families staring down the same playbook we beat here. Fake violations, paper storms, developer shadows. Our success rate is 100% so far, not because the world got kinder overnight, but because bullies fold when their victims show up with counsel and a record that reads like a prosecutor's grocery list. We also teach church basements, grange halls, VFWs, about how HOAs are supposed to be formed, how to request documents, what under color of law actually means, and how to preserve chain of custody on the footage your porch cam caught at 2 a.m. Knowledge isn't just power, it's armor, and it costs a lot less than the money fear will take from you. The wave we kicked off in Cedar Falls pushed past the county line. The legislature met, and out of committee came the Rural Family Protection Act, a clean little bill I helped draft that did 3 simple but overdue things. Stiffened penalties for systematic housing fraud and impersonation of authority, funded a state-level rapid response unit for property rights harassment, and set mandatory transparency standards for associations claiming jurisdiction, recorded covenants, accessible books, real notices, or no enforcement. It passed with bipartisan yawns and a standing vote because even folks who argue all day about water and taxes can agree that stealing a family's land with fake paper is a sin the law should remember how to name. On the community side, Jim Patterson wired up an audit committee that publishes a 1-page ledger every month. Money in, money out, no jargon, and Maria Santos, who once took notes in my kitchen like a paralegal sharpening a knife, now teaches a quarterly class for new board members on what an association can do, shouldn't do, and must never pretend to do. The most popular slide is the one with 3 words. No secret rules. The people who used to watch me through their blinds wave now, and sometimes stop at the fence to trade whether lies and heifer gossip. Kids bike past without glancing for drones, and when someone wants to put up a shed or change a roof, they ask a neighbor for a level instead of permission for a life. We've built a phone tree that calls the sheriff for the right reasons and each other for the rest. If you're looking for symmetry, here's the part that would have made Grandpa snort coffee. Channel 7 sent the same reporter back out last month to do a follow-up called From Fraud to Fix, and she ended the segment not with a shot of sirens but with a kid from Dallas holding a bottle while a calf tugged at it like a locomotive. And I stood in the background trying not to cry because sometimes the thing you save waves back at you with its whole body. I still keep the binder on a shelf by the door, not as a shrine to a fight, but as a reminder of how we won. Dates, signatures, statutes, and the refusal to answer noise with noise. I still test the gate battery the first Saturday of the month and update the code with dispatch because vigilance, properly applied, is just respect in work boots. And sometimes, when the porch is quiet enough to hear the tiny sounds, sparrows bickering in the live oak, the sand rolling under a hoof, the click of a tick landing on a fence post, I read a page from Joe's old journal and remember his line. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, but if you're fighting for the right reasons with the right knowledge, you'll usually win. We did, and it didn't just stay a win for us. It became a habit for this town, a muscle memory for how to say no to grift and yes to governance, and if there's any advice worth bottling from this porch it's this. Save everything, ask for what you're owed, learn the rules before someone weaponizes them against you, and don't mistake a loud voice for a lawful one. The sun slides higher, the cattle move to shade, and the road beyond my gate looks ordinary again, which is the exact shape of victory. I wanted nothing to see here, folks, except a family place doing what it was built to do and a community that finally remembered it doesn't need a tyrant to feel like a neighborhood.